beyond the human galaxy, beyond the range of man-made spacecraft and astro-telepathy, lies the unspeakable cold of the intergalactic void. Few have ventured into this realm, and fewer still have returned. It is the great barrier that divides galaxy from galaxy, known from unknown, a place where time and space conspire to hold the worlds apart with inconceivable distances. Yet the void is no longer empty. An immeasurably ancient and implacable intelligence moves through the cold and the dark, its many eyes fixed on the distant glittering lights of our galaxy. The Great Devourer moves between the stars and hungers of the flesh of all that lie before it. This great organism, this monstrous entity, is known as the Tyranid race. Even by naming the Great Devourer, civilizations betray their ignorance. Every thought and action, every spark of life in the Tyranid race is bound and interlinked into a single mind, a single great entity that stretches over light years of space and is controlled by the immortal Hive mind. 1 billion times 1 billion Tyranids stand at the galaxy's edge, yet each one is no more than a single cell in the living body of the Hive mind. The Devourer of Worlds. Inquisition File, reference 9569999X/TY. Ordo, Xenos, file, accept Xload, classified. Inquisitor, ID, redacted, from the word of the Holy Inquisition. The Tyranids are a voracious race of Xenos, a plague that invades the known galaxy from the galactic rim. Akin to the devastation locusts would inflict upon crops on ancient Terra, they consume all life, all biomass in their wake. Upon each and every world they reach, they devour all, devouring all life in their wake until naught but cold, lifeless rock remains. They are perhaps the single greatest threat to all life within real space, and this threat is ever escalating. It is the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition and the Magi biologies that have sought to understand and quantify this threat. Even with the onset of the Fourth Tyrannic War, these terrifying Xenos are still little understood, catalogued and described by even the most esteemed luminaries. What is known is that the Tyranids and their technology is entirely biological in its inception, composition, and design. Despite their biological nature, the actions of this Xenos threat are often far in advance of anything the Imperium of mankind has encountered, even tracing back to the days of the Great Crusade. Their many bioforms, war beasts, and psionic life forms are terrifying to behold. Armored warrior bioforms with interlaced chitinous plates and endless swarms of drone-like hormagaunts often form the first wave of invasion post a gene stealer infiltration. Other beasts may possess chameleonic adaptations, take the form of clouds of poisonous exhaled spores, or even the psionic might of the neurotyrants, from which its psionic field drives prey organisms to shattering madness. Adaptation to any threat is key to Tyranid superiority, and the guns, blades, transport biocraft, and void ships are all living creatures. Weaponry most often takes the composition of repulsive symbiotes grafted to the host creature. Any ammunition, for lack of a better term, is organic, taking the form of chitin armored beetles, gouts of acidic emulsions, bioplasma, armor-piercing shard beetles, and neurologic lightning. It is key to the success of the Tyranid menace that their infinite capacity for adaptation continues to allow for an ever-evolving capacity for death and destruction. For all their grotesque manners of carnage, it is the Hive mind that is the single, most captivating and terrifying adaptation of all. It is the Hive mind that orchestrates the Tyranid swarms toward their relentless drive for biomass and toward the galactic core proper. The Hive mind orchestrates a synaptic control web via satellite nodal beasts who lie among the Tyranid swarms, giving the Hive mind influence across all bioforms within a battlefield, world, or within space itself. As the bioships move from world to world, consuming biomass, the Hive mind goes too. allowing a level of synchronicity that borders on the preternatural. Whilst a conceptual basis of the hive mind has been gleaned by imperial scholars, the anatomic and physiologic basis of the hive mind proper lies unknown. Remembrances and inquisitors postulate whether it is a galactic megapredator, metaphysical psychic presence, or even a deity. Any of these explanations have not been proven, and it is likely that the true basis for this being is beyond the understanding of many of the galaxy's mortal races. What is clear is that all organic life is merely fuel to the Tyranid swarm, simple biomass to be consumed, devoured and utilized in the swarm's march toward adaptive perfection. It has been the case since the first Tyranid hive fleet that the number of bioships and forms have increased at an ever-terrifying rate. Every year, century and millennium, these Xenos invaders have coursed from the galactic edge, with each showing new adaptations and predative methodologies. They continue their march toward the galactic core in a tendril-like fashion, consuming everything in their way until naught but dust and decay remains on lifeless worlds. It is the shadow in the warp that is often the first admonition of the Tyranid approach. This elucidates itself as a psychic signal that courses ahead of hive fleets, akin to a metaphysical fog slowly creeping toward the world. Its nullifying psychic static distorts astropathic communication, leaving worlds at the mercy of the swarm. It addles minds and souls, bringing psychic and mental distress, paranoia, and hallucination to those worldly inhabitants. It is the psychers that are the worst affected, often with those trying to access their powers driven mad or destroyed by the overwhelming alien dissonance that overloads their minds. It is only then that the bioships and endless swarms emerge from the darkness of the void. They incapacitate, maim, and destroy defense platforms and warships with bioforms that move in harmony with the void of space. It is then that they settle in orbit around their prey and expel trillions of warrior bioforms upon the surface of the world. They initially meet resistance, as oft the prey world will use defense fortifications, lasers, or other manner of ordnance to destroy sporecraft and winged swarms upon approach. As these defense wane in their ability to keep up with the endless tide, ground forces of the occupying race will unleash barrages of defensive laser, artillery, or even latent psychic abilities to reduce the initial waves often to charred remains. It will be for naught. As the endless swarms batter and bruise these defenses, the defense batteries fall silent, air forces are grounded, routed, and destroyed utterly, and the ground defenders become screaming, fleeing prey. As the assault continues, microscopic Tyranid spores turn even the biosphere against their prey. The atmosphere and inhaled gases turn toxic, eventually dissolving their foe into pure biomass. A paste ready to be consumed, incorporated into Tyranid physiology, and used to feed the endless swarms. At this point, when victory is complete, the Tyranids will begin to feed as this raw biological gruel flows upon gargantuan fat-feeding tubes to replenish the waiting hive ships, who consume it metaphorically similar to engorged insects until naught remains but a lifeless rock, desolate and deceased within the void of space. Inquisitor's Log. Designation: Ordo Xenos. Subject: the Tyranid Swarm, the Devourer of Worlds, the Hive Mind, the Tyranid Swarm, all monikers of perhaps the single greatest threat to face the Imperium beyond the 40th millennium. They are an utterly merciless foe, one that cannot be reasoned or bargained with. One would think that this singular desire, that to consume, to grow, would make the role of Imperial soldiers easier, for a foe that can be understood can be overcome, can be beaten. Not so for the Tyranid menace. They are uncompromising in their genetic adaptation, their perfection. For all of the might of over 1 million worlds, the Tyranid menace never stops coming. Their hive mind, if it is fact akin to that of a neurologic concept, is totally alien to even the most esteemed luminaries. They gorge on our failures, our very being, feeding their bioships in grotesque space elevator-like feeding tubes. They take our very being and use it against us. They understand us at a genetic level better than perhaps even ourselves. We must seek to further our understanding, for even in our initial forays, it is clear that to sever this neurologic connection leaves the swarm naught but extremely dangerous, animalistic beasts. And perhaps in this minute detail, our salvation may be found. He heard a keening behind him and turned to face the horror of a carnifex charging, blades clicking, saliva flying from the cutting limbs. Femlin tried to turn his autogun, but became nothing more than a shower of meat. A Lamenter, 2 of them, hit the Screamer Killer from the left side with bolt rounds, and as it turned, destroying its head with melter fire, its scything blades, still whickering lethally as it toppled, decapitated them both. Grouse fell to his knees. He honestly didn't think it possible that Space Marines could die. They seemed to him invulnerable, godlike, the walking manifestations of the God Emperor of Terror himself. But it was true. He looked down at the fallen, splintered helm of one Marine, the glassy, dull, dead face peering out of it. He looked away, but saw another Lamenter ripped in 2 by a Mantis Killer 50 meters away. A Ravener fell, twisting and flicking, onto 3 more and ground them into the soil, ripping open their armor with its chitinous mouthparts. Then Grouse saw the worst sight of all, the worst, most unmanning thing his eyes had ever witnessed. 4 Lamenter Space Marines, falling back, overwhelmed. They scrambled through the treacherous, matted ground growth, trying to find cover from the zoanthrope that shimmered after them, spitting bolts of energized death. They turned, fired, ran on, to no avail. The hovering thing exploded one of them and then closed on the other 3. One headed left and ran onto the keening bone swords of a Tyranid warrior. Another was felled by a glancing blast from the zoanthrope and was swiftly torn apart by a pack of termagants. The last made it another 20 meters before the relentless zoanthrope hit him and exploded his armored form with a vicious stab of energy. Grouse couldn't believe what he was seeing. In the first 20 minutes from drop, the Lamenters had cut a hole in the alien assault that had punished them cruelly. Now, in just 5 more minutes, they were being annihilated. A spore mine from a biovore blew 2 more apart and sent a wash of mud and sap high into the air. 2 Lamenters faced down another Carnifex and blew it apart with sustained bolt fire. A second later, they were both dismembered by Hormagaunts before they could reload. Grouse saw the Hive Tyrant advancing through the flaming greenery, slaughtering Space Marines with its massive blade. He saw the vast, obscene shapes of the Bio-Titans lurching forward in the distant smog. The last Lamenter died 39 minutes after the first had clambered from his drop pod. The convoy was ablaze. What parts of it weren't shredded or swarmed over? Grouse dropped into a foxhole, feeling the undergrowth flourish and twist around him. His body was crawling with parasitic infection. He heard chattering. On the horizon line, most nightmarish of all, the vile Ripper swarms were moving in, consuming everything in their path, eating up the world. Karl Grouse made his peace with the God Emperor, with his long-dead parents, with his long-lost homeworld, beloved, distant Mordia, praying it would never suffer this blasphemous fate. He put the snout of his lasgun in his open mouth. It was at Tyran Primus in 745 M41 that the first known encounter between Tyranid bioforms and the Imperium of Man would take place. This conflict would foretell the beginning of Hive Fleet Behemoth's destructive campaign. It is of course difficult to fully ascertain when humanity did in fact first encounter the Tyranid swarm, however. Some remembrances recall it was in the Tiamat system upon the jungle world of Zeophoria in M35, where a Tyranid megastructure of encephalitic tissue may have first been catalogued. Others suggest it may have been in the Helicon sector in M36, with vague recollections of aeronautical monstrosities. Some even suggest that Xenos races such as the Tau Empire may have been battling Hive fleets for centuries. It was a routine Imperial census that would glean the first clues of the terror that would soon fall upon Tyran Primus. Imperial explorators would elucidate in their studies that worlds near to Tyran Primus were utterly devoid of all biological life. They would find no trace of even microscopic life forms upon these worlds. Unbeknownst to these luminaries, these worlds were evidence of the actions of Hive Fleet Behemoth. As the Hive Fleet had met the known galaxy after its perpetual and hibernative foray through the intergalactic void, it would have little reserve biomass and energy reserves left. So it would be that the Hive Fleet would initially consume life upon defenseless worlds to rebuild its reserves and strength. Using this biomass, the Hive Fleet would tirelessly produce battle-ready bioforms, gaining the strength to invade local worlds with sentient defenses. Without adequate context to understand the significance of such dead worlds, this mystery of lifeless rock would not be solved. Reports of dead worlds would be gathered and filed up to more established luminaries and officers, yet no action would be taken. It would be a simple survey ship encountering a haze of unidentified objects that would yield the first clue to the threat waiting in the dark. This haze would be in truth biological mines that would strike the craft, but with steely resolve, this ship would hobble back to Tyran Primus with an ominous warning. It would be only a few solar cycles later that the invasion proper would commence. The outpost of Tyran Primus was overseen by Adeptus Mechanicus, Magos Varnak. The base proper was a stalwart fortress within a chain of volcanic rock and islands. Due to the ferocious storms and local wildlife found within the islands and in its oceans, the base was fortified, as well as any essential Mechanicus stronghold. The fortress boasted soldiery of both the Adeptus Mechanicus and Astra Militarum and several air support wings. It would be the 4 gargantuan orbital defense lasers that would be its main defense. These guns, settled inside ceramite silos and draped in void shields, were ready to repel invaders. These main batteries would be further supplemented by a network of gun emplacements and bunkers of Proteus class. These fortifications and standing defenses gave Tyran Primus an ability to hold off invasions beyond the usual scope of a standing outpost. It would be for naught against the overwhelming strength of Hive Fleet Behemoth. Having gathered strength from local worlds, incorporating this biomass and building billions of battle-ready bioforms, Behemoth was ready to parasitize Primus proper. The first hour of the invasion would be racked with volleys of orbital laser fire, lighting up its storm-hewn skies and parting them with luminous flares as humanity tried desperately to stand steady against the invading Xenos. There would be concern as the cooling systems of the great lasers were ready to fail and overheat, but at that moment, the Xenos withdrew. A curious vein took root in Magos Varnak, and he would order his diminutive fleet to harass the retreating biocraft. He would be taken for a fool. As his fleet took passage through the spore clouds beyond the planet, the true might of Hive Fleet Behemoth would be made manifest. The Magos would discover that the several dozen bioships destroyed were insignificant to the fleet of several thousand strong. The vessels now beyond the ken of their orbital batteries would be utterly slaughtered, torn apart by tendrils, boarded and consumed of all life by gene stealer rippers and many other horrific bioforms. With its defense fleet routed, the Hive Fleet would make ready the true invasion. Thousands of Tyrannocytes, a type of Tyranid transport bioform, would erupt toward the surface of the world. Though the stalwart defenders and their orbital batteries would destroy many, many more would crash into the ocean. It would be as if the oceans themselves recoiled with disgust as the Tyranid menace erupted from their biopods, consumed the local fauna, and then ascended the walls of the outpost itself. The Imperial Guard, ever vigilant, would open fire with lasgun volleys as the rain soaked the Guard and their commanders every second of the beleaguered defense. Endless volleys would cut through the swarm as wave after endless wave of hormagaunts, gene stealers, and warrior bioforms were cut down. The mounds of deceased Tyranids would create killing zones between the bastions of defenders. Thunderbolt fighters would harry the incoming pods whilst the orbital lasers kept firing against the endless tide. For a moment, it would seem as if the Hive fleet would have to recalculate. Then, the northern batteries fell silent. Thousands of gargoyles, winged warrior organisms operating in swarms, would congest the colossal beam projectors of the northern orbital gun, causing it to fail. The eastern defense laser would be the next to fall as a carnifex. A massive, adaptable warrior organism would use its frame as a living battering ram to puncture the reinforced wall surrounding the laser, crushing many guardsmen and rupturing the coolant lines. As the battle would rage on, Thunderbolt fighters would be overwhelmed by toxic spores, gargoyles and harpies, eventually culminating in Tyrannocyte transports, landing on the base proper. This would be the coup de grace for Tyrann Primus. The bastions would be ravaged, the laser batteries destroyed, and its mortal defenders slaughtered against the pouring rain and tempestuous storms. Only the command bunker would remain, its mighty walls assailed by endless monstrosities. Varnak would watch helplessly through luminous displays. The adamantine gate of the bunker would finally cave inwards, and the Tyranid swarm breach the facility itself. Guardsmen and Skitarii would fight helplessly with Flamer, Lasgun, and Phosphex as their bodies were mutilated by the relentless Xenos. Hormagaunts would team into the command center as Varnak hummed a final prayer to the Omnissiah as he sent a data codex deep into the base detailing what had happened there. This codex would later be discovered by Inquisitor Kryptman, who would fight endlessly to destroy the Tyranid menace. He would find the codex upon a world, desolate and barren, no trace of its former actuality as an ocean world. For it had been utterly consumed, every cell of biomass recovered, and water consumed. Kryptman would discover the terror that had befell the world, and so the Tyrannic Wars would find their beginning. Then he became aware of the psychic presence of the Tyranids. It was weird, like nothing else he had ever experienced, an implacable, ferocious sentience which was ancient beyond imagining. It stood alone. No one would ever be able to speak to it. Suddenly, he felt as though his psyche had been torn apart like the human body on the floor of the chamber. The scene before his eyes vanished. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark, but filled with a seething and a rustling. He had entered the hive mind, and now he understood what the Tyranids were. The Tyranids were what ants and termites would be if they could evolve further and become intelligent. What made such intelligence incomprehensible was that the Tyranids had never evolved emotions. They were aware that concepts such as sympathy and honor existed in the species they harvested, but they viewed them only in the abstract and dismissed them as evolutionary mistakes. Gene coding for emotion was never made use of by the Hive fleets. Yes, the Tyranids were intelligent, but intelligence was not a quality particularly prized by the Hive mind. A Tyranid creature could reason, but it never did so out of self-interest. Intelligence, like everything else, served only Tyranid hive instincts. Or rather, it served the single great Tyranid instinct, the one, overwhelming, compulsive urge. Survive, and survive forever. When the Tyranids invaded a galaxy, they took aboard vast amounts of foodstuffs and raw materials, but those were not what they came looking for. They knew that every system, whether mechanical or biological, eventually would be extinguished. Most species lasted only a few million years. A few managed to survive for up to 100 million years. But sooner or later, they would perish as their DNA either failed to adapt or simply deteriorated through natural wear. The Tyranids had found the only possible remedy for this. They moved from galaxy to galaxy, harvesting fresh, newly evolved DNA with which to renew and reinvigorate their own. They were the universe's ultimate life form. Quite possibly, they had existed forever and would continue to exist forever. Quite possibly, the universe contained an infinite number of Hive fleets. The Imperium of Man had beaten off one Hive fleet. Perhaps it could beat off others. It would be a rare reversal for the Tyranids, but that did not matter at all. In a few million years, the Imperium would be gone, the human race would be gone, and some other Hive fleet would arrive, meeting weaker resistance, and would leave the galaxy lifeless and desolate. Then, a few billion years later, life would evolve all over again, on millions of planets, and again, a Hive fleet would move in. Jaxabam did not think the Hive tyrant was at all aware that he was eavesdropping on the Hive mind. He was not worthy of notice. The Tyranid did not respect human or any other intelligence. All they saw in the human race was a species possessing young, vigorous DNA. He would try to persuade Drenth Druze to join the Imperial Guard and help defend the Imperium. Hive Fleet Kraken had to be repelled, or humanity was doomed. Not that the outcome was of any importance to the Tyranids. To them, species evolved and perished like blades of grass. Galaxies condensed, blazed, then gutted out. The supposedly immortal Chaos Gods would not even last that long. They would perish when the psyches which sustained them died out. Only the Tyranids lasted forever. Hive fleets are made up of scores of hive ships, colossal void-capable organisms clad in thick chitinous armor and a corpulent hide, which has adapted to ward off the absolute cold of space. The Tyranid Xenos is ever adaptable, and so an incalculable number of variants have been observed among Hive craft. What is notable is most have trailed tendrils and hooked talons, which can wreath themselves around hostile warships, quashing them into wrecks against the void of space. These voidcraft also often spout gargantuan beaks, fanged maws, and immense feeder probosci, which aid in harvesting biomass or a conquered space fortress. Each and every ship holds hordes of warrior bioforms, birthed within organ chambers. Luminaries detail survivor accounts, primarily gathered from Adeptus Astartes excursions, of tunnels akin to the lumina of capillary networks and gargantuan cavities giving way to horrific bioscapes. Reproductive chambers birth all manner of warrior bioforms endlessly. Encephalitic currents between voltaic synapses build lattices of electropylon-like networks. These networks also coil around Norn queens as they awaken to command invasion swarms from up on high. Sentry bioforms prowl the mucus-ridden tunnels and rip through the luminal walls to surround and surprise invaders akin to the vessel's immune system. The monstrous tervigans spawn additional hunter organisms from their thoraxes. Unending waves of hormagaunts, termagants, and gargoyles await the call, whilst biotitans are held in biostasis. An apocalypse at the beck and call of the Hive fleet. The Hive ships are the primary nodes of synaptic activity for the Hive mind and direct the boundless scores of Tyranid organisms in their conquest. The biological factories within create, splice, and assimilate genomes and new bioforms that are perfectly adapted for each and every engagement or invasion. It is not just the organism within that are ever adapting, as physical variety between voidcraft has been observed. Some may be living void-born battering rams clad in adamantine-equivalent chitin hulls that tear apart orbital stations. Others may have hyperactive adrenal glands that allow for exceptional speeds to intercept enemy craft or blockade invaded worlds. Some may have maws with incalculable bristles for harvesting biomass and other resources from gas clouds or other interstellar phenomena. Tyranid biocraft do not utilize the warp for interstellar travel. Despite this, they achieve considerable velocity through the use of small ancillary craft known as narvhals. The narvhals lack almost any bioweaponry and little protective carapaces, and are thus always heavily defended. They have a spine of monofilament spines on its bow that allows the interpretation of gravitic signals astrologic data, and other relevant stellar data. They detect stellar bodies at vast distances and create compressed space transit corridors, using a system's own gravitic forces through which the Hive fleet may traverse great distances. This corridor cannot be utilized near strong gravitational forces, and therefore cannot exit right upon a prey world, and must utilize conventional propulsion to reach its target. Nevertheless, the manipulation of a system's gravitational forces can cause shocking natural disasters upon a localized prey planet, including solar flares, earthquakes, tsunamis, and many other disasters, between the creation of the gravitic snare and the arrival of the Hive fleet itself. It undoubtedly only ever benefits the Tyranids' invasion plans as planetary disasters further bolster doomsday cults and heightens the anxiety of the defending race. The most horrific to most mortal races are the psychic beacons upon some Hive craft, which take the form of cerebral nodes that are capable of devastating warp blasts that atomize hostile vessels and also project the shadow in the warp. This phenomena surrounds the Hive fleet, extending vast distances in each and every direction. It is pervasive in its design to invade mortal senses and interfere with their warp connection, causing anxiety, paranoia, and panic to spread amongst targeted populations. A sense of impending doom incites violence and doomsaying amongst even psychically poor individuals. For those who are more attuned, the shadow in the warp is a far more severe prospect. Human psychers, orc weirdboys, and the entire Eldari race find their psychic sensitivity a key vulnerability. It causes an encephalitic blanket of static to fill their mind as even thoughts and speech becomes difficult. The chittering and screaming of infinite horrors pervades their minds as it tears across their mindscape, causing the most mortal dread imaginable. Psychic powers and astropathic communication are the most difficult of all to continue to exercise, as at the least, these powers will bring the user to near total mental and physical exhaustion, and at worst, explosive cranial hemorrhage. Distress calls to the wider Imperium are thus almost impossible, as are the abilities of the Navis Nobilitae, as the third eye of the navigators are blinded, their minds overwhelmed by psychic strain. Even warp sorcery may vacillate as easily as more consecrated psychic powers, as the retainers of the dark gods are left hollering in powerless protest. Thus, most foes of the Tyranid menace, whether they be combatants, voidcraft, or entire worlds, are oft left screaming into the void, naught to be heard but a whisper of dread. Imperial xenobiologists have detailed distinct unifying traits, hunting patterns and strategies that characterize different fleets from one another. It appears that each is an attempt by the directing Hive mind to combat each of the galaxy's sentient life forms that may pose a threat to its eternal quest for absolute consumption. Some may favor subterranean assault, some focused upon biowarfare and spore cloud formations. Others may deploy monstrous bioforms akin to living tanks, apex war beasts, whilst others focus upon the psionic potential of the species. All exhibit an unmatched adaptive response, overcoming almost any foe as they manifest rapidly assimilated countermeasures. If winged bombers rain down death upon swarms, flocks of winged bioforms may be seen on the next approach, tearing them apart. Gene toxins that disintegrated Tyranid organisms at a molecular level in a previous foray will be completely ineffective on the next engagement as their biochemistry and cellular makeup adapts. No matter what adversity befalls the Great Devourer, it seems to have a perfect response. This is an approach that finds its way to assimilate between different Hive fleets. How and why this process occurs is utterly alien, but has been the downfall of many a beleaguered defending species. Inquisitor's Log. Designation: Ordo Xenos. Subject: Hive fleets. Whilst no audience with the luminaries of the esteemed Magi biologies is ever dull, it is those that discuss the Hive fleets that are ever captivating. Every aspect of their biology is manifested for the express purposes of destruction and consumption. Their hyperadaptive physiology means that almost every boarding action or strategy ends in failure. Reports from inquisitorial forces and Death Watch Astartes all document viscous, dank, and debilitating conditions. Some reports detail creeping tentacles with orbital sockets, effervescent encephalitic tissue, nests of barbed teeth, as well as filter-obfuscating toxic spores. Peculiar gravitic phenomena, clouds of biostatic and psychic flares make traversal at best difficult, at worst, death-defying. This is nothing to say of the sentry forms that attack invading forces akin to our own mortal immune system with corrosive ichor, digestive acids, and respiratory impeding toxins. Their external anatomy and physiology are no less daunting, posing an existential threat even to fleets of the capable Adeptus Astartes. It is the view of many within this ordo that the Tyranid threat can only be assuaged with the destruction of the Hive fleets. No less than total destruction of the synaptic vessels of the Hive mind can be considered. Any and all measures must be taken, or the sanctity of the Imperium and its continued survival may not be ironclad. The Tyranids are without a doubt the most rapidly evolving creatures in the galaxy. The Magos biologies of Mars have observed developmental DNA leaps between broods originating from different Hive fleets that would take other beasts millions of years to achieve. It appears that the Tyranid Norn queens, or primogenitor organisms aboard the Hive ships, are capable of modifying their progeny in response to the environment and life forms they encounter. Newly harvested genetic codes are assimilated, the prey's defensive measures are examined, and improved creatures are bioengineered to overcome that resistance. Over time, the myriad improvements to the Hive fleet's gene pool are melded with others, strengthening the entire race. A case in point is to observe the degree of integration of the Tyranids' symbiote weapons. At first, these were relatively crude and were carried and employed, however, distastefully, by the creatures that used them like a gun or a sword. In later encounters, Tyranids have exhibited, more and more frequently, weaponry meshed directly into the creatures carrying them. Now it has become impossible to tell where the Tyranid warrior ends and its weapon symbiotes begin. I think we can be assured that the Norn queens will continue to work tirelessly towards more and more perfectly adapted bioforms, all tasked for killing the inhabitants of this galaxy, just as they have in others before ours. Simply put, over the coming centuries, we may be out-evolved to the point of extinction. Magos Biologists Aldegaric. Tyranid warrior organisms employ both genomic adaptation as living weaponry and war gear. It is both the variants of the bioforms themselves and the armaments that display sickening genetic superiority. It is difficult for even the most studied xenobiologists to discern where the organism proper ends and the weapon begins, as both are linked by pulsating tubules, chitinous growth, and membranous bindings of Xenos tissue. Common bioforms include the Hormagaunts and Termagaunts. The Hormagaunts are swarming cannon fodder and vanguard predators that are scattered upon prey worlds in their billions. They rage with their talons, wearing down defenders' ammunition, and resolve in equal measure as mountains of Tyranid and hostile forces build in equal measure. Termagaunts are similar in form to Hormagaunts, around the size of an exceptionally large hound, but boast differing bioweaponry from flesh borers to shard launchers or even spike rifles. Tyranid warriors are larger, strong, agile, and independently intelligent with their synaptic link. Whilst they are endlessly adaptable, they engage with the claws, talons, and bioweaponry whilst supporting smaller bioforms, acting as a synaptic lattice point for more animalistic organisms. More exotic bioforms are utilized to bolster current combat engagements, for surgical strikes, employ psychic warfare, bolster synaptic connections, or even overcome initially more powerful foes. The mighty Carnifex is a pillar of the Tyranid advance into fortified positions with their armored chitinous frame, range of bioweapons, and biomorphs. The Carnifex will use its frame akin to an organic battering ram to demolish defenses. Ranged weapons including bioplasma, death splitters, and strangle thorn cannons may be used to punch through an embittered foe. Lictors are the result of genomic splicing of the warrior bioform. Primarily a dermatologic adaptation, their chameleonic dermis hides them from organic or technologic discovery. They stalk larger prey, Adeptus Astartes, Asuriani strike forces, or even isolated armored carriers, until they can strike with their claws and talons, cracking open their victims' skulls and employing their feeder tendrils to learn the secrets of their prey. Zoanthropes harness the might of the hive mind. Whilst frail in physical form, they utilize the psionic potential of the hive mind to project scorching psionic blasts, as well as warp fields that can deflect incoming projectiles. Neurolictors employ neural disruption fields that causes archaic terror responses in organic foes, organic foci of psychological warfare. Hive tyrants adopt control of the swarm on behalf of the hive mind. Gargantuan in physical appearance and might, they employ both strategic cunning and brutal ferocity with bone sword, lash, whip, and talon, as well as heavy venom cannons to eviscerate the swarm's foes. Endless other variants of organisms exist, from the winged Tyranid prime, biovore artillery, harpies, organic carpets of ripper swarms and mighty Tyrannifex, all exist as an adaptation and response to a challenge for the hive mind, ever evolving to overcome any threat to its goal of absolute consumption. The organic technology that is employed by the Tyranids is utterly alien and can match any advanced race. All weaponry is, to some extent, an extension of the host organism's anatomy and physiology. The Devourer is a projectile weapon with a barrel of elongated, decomposing meat. Within this decaying mass is scores of parasitic worms. Shot forth via biovoltaic measure from the host organism, these worms are launched at nearby hostiles. These worms seek to burrow into their victim's nervous system, devouring it from within, causing indescribable neuropathic pain prior to death, incapacitating, then exterminating the target. The flesh borer utilizes organic boring beetles, which launch from the barrel with flea-like rear legs, attaching then chewing through the victim. Spine fists connect to the host bioform's respiratory system with capillary tubes. With a simple exhalation, pressurized air launches even more pressurized air through the spine fists, which then propel chitinous spikes toward the foe. Venom cannons expel condensed crystallized acid coated in metallic residue at considerable speed, adept at puncturing armored targets. Heavier variants launch at greater speeds, charged with electrostatic force. Death spitters fire highly corrosive, large maggot-like organisms. The creature is stripped of its protective flesh and loaded into the weapon, and the corrosive nature of the creature causes the death spitter to react violently, expelling the creature toward the foe at high speed. Scything talons, bone swords, bone maces, and rending claws are all symbiotic chitin, grafted to the host organism to be used with ferocious efficiency. Some utilize the synaptic field of the host into fields that disrupt the foe's neurologic system as they are struck. After the success of the Blood Angel's initial assault, even Dante was surprised at the speed with which the hive mind struck back. In the span of but a few minutes, the swarm was regrouping within the ruins, and a new and terrible psychic presence stalked among them. Mephiston was the first to feel it, his keen, esoteric senses detecting the approaching shadow within the background storm of alien whispers. Acknowledging his warning, Dante pulled the Blood Angels back towards the port's fortified southern gate, ordering them to dig in and make ready. Moments later, a hulking trio of maleceptors lumbered out of the ruins, surrounded by shoals of floating psyker beasts. The air around these Tyranids hummed and shimmered, and no battle brother that looked upon them could deny the terrible presence of the hive mind walked among them. In the wake of the alien psykers came fresh waves of scuttling creatures, reinvigorated and spurred on by the iron will of the psycho beasts. Dante ordered all fire concentrated upon the hulking psychic horrors, and a storm of shells, bolts, and blasts rained down upon the creatures. However, almost every round fell short, exploding in flashes of psychic energy upon an invisible shield projected by the beasts. Then, the Blood Angels were forced to shift their aim to the more immediate threat, as a rolling tide of fanged creatures bore down upon them. The air was filled with the hiss of alien beasts and the roar of chainswords as both sides met. This time, however, the power of the alien psykers tipped the odds in the Tyranids' favour. Gaunts fought on with mindless fury, clawing over their broodmates to get at the Blood Angels. Coils of dark energy lanced out from the leader beasts to send Space Marines to their knees, blood leaking from rents in their helmets. When Dante led a charge against the creatures, they turned their attentions to him, lancing tendrils of power at his mind. Only centuries of psycho-conditioning held the Tyranids' mental assault at bay. Even so, the chapter master faltered, slowed as if running underwater as he tried desperately to get close enough to the creatures to strike. From across the battlefield, Mephiston saw the beast turn upon Dante and moved to aid his lord. Supported by epistolary Martellos, Mephiston turned his formidable mind to tearing apart the Maleceptor's psychic domination. As the battle raged outside the fire-ringed port, an epic battle of wills unfolded between Mephiston and the trio of Tyranid psykers. Bolts of ruby light warred with twisting tendrils of shadow as the two enemies clashed. At first, the chief librarian seemed to be besting the beasts, spears of bloody fire and waves of crimson force crashing into the Tyranids. Several of the closest floating psyker beasts screamed and perished as Mephiston's power touched them, and by degrees the warp field around the creatures weakened. And then the full attention of the Mind Death turned upon Mephiston, and the monstrous alien trio combined their powers. Every Blood Angel upon the field felt the psychic shriek which rolled out from the beasts, even though it was directed squarely at the chief librarian. Battle Brothers clenched their teeth in agony or let out incoherent yells as their minds were ravaged. Still, their pain was but the barest fraction of what Mephiston felt as the psychic blast crashed into him. The chief librarian's mind filled with a cacophony of monstrous alien thoughts. Any Blood Angel but Mephiston would have perished under the onslaught, their consciousness burnt away like cobwebs before a flame. Only the chief librarian's indomitable will kept him alive, the same control that had seen him master the Black Rage, allowing him to cling to his sanity. Though Mephiston did not fall, his power was broken. As powerful as the chief librarian was, his abilities were like a candle held against the fires of a star when compared with the enormous power of the Hive mind. An immeasurably ancient and implacable intelligence moves through the cold and the dark, its many eyes fixed on the distant glittering lights of our galaxy. The Great Devourer moves between the stars and hungers of the flesh of all that lie before it.